Remember demo discs? Back in the day before internet speeds were any good, just kidding, I'm in Australia, magazines and such would give away these discs full of game demos and previews, and they were the coolest things. One of my favorites as a kid was this one, which came with a Pepsi Easter show bag. It mostly just had game trailers for all the more popular games, but it did have a few playable demos. I spent my time with two of them, Kohan, Ahriman's Gift, and a shooter called Deadly Dozen. Deadly Dozen is a budget-priced tactical squad shooter set in World War II from 2001. If you haven't heard of it, don't worry, you're not alone. Google searches returned next to nothing, and critic reviews weren't exactly glowing. I played Deadly Dozen simply to see how it held up nowadays, and it turned out to be a captivating experience. What I remember from the demo was the tutorial, the first level, and the still fantastic main menu music. Being so young at the time, I could never beat the first level, but not for lack of trying. Because of this, I know this level inside out, and I was actually going to create a small video analysis of it a while back because it's so well made and open, which turns out to be true for most of the levels. Some years later, I bought Deadly Dozen off eBay, and though it didn't hold my attention when I first bought it for one reason or another, I'm glad I gave it another shot. In Deadly Dozen, you choose up to 4 soldiers from an assortment of a dozen to tackle each of the 10 different lengthy missions at hand. You can switch between each man in game and command them with simple orders. Each mission has their own primary and secondary objectives, and each man has 7 different stats such as heavy weapons, explosives, medical, and toughness, among others. These stats have a massive impact on gameplay, which I didn't first realize. For example, someone with a high medical skill will be able to heal themselves or their teammates up completely with only 1 health pack, whereas someone with low medical skill couldn't even heal half of someone's hit points. Similarly, someone with low toughness will die very easily, or someone who's bad at small arms will do barely any damage with submachine guns. Of course, differing the amount of damage someone can do with a weapon or explosive just because of their skill isn't really realistic at all, but it's an effective way of implementing these skills into the game without having to use arbitrary weapon inaccuracy, which lowers the player's skill ceiling. That said, they do make sniping more inaccurate depending on the sniping skill, which is a strange choice. It's up to you to pick which men are more appropriate for each mission, but for the most part, as long as you have a sniper, a medic, an explosives guy, and another guy with good toughness, then you're set. Unfortunately, you're never explicitly told what each skill actually does, so you kinda need to find out with practice. The twist to Deadly Dozen's structure is that if some of your men die and you finish a mission, those men are dead for good. It's not exactly permadeath, because if all your men die, then you're forced to restart the mission with all of them intact, and you can also choose to quick save and quick load whenever you want, but otherwise it's a great way of creating some unscripted scenarios and consequences. The men's stats between them aren't really balanced at all. Some soldiers are clearly much better than others, and while this may sound like a bad thing, it actually isn't. There's a risk-reward element to taking your best man out on a mission, because if they die, then they're gone for good. On top of that, you have to figure out how to assemble new teams when your men die. Say your favorite medic dies, who is also your explosives guy. Now you have to fill that void in the squad, maybe with 2 different guys, one for first aid and one for explosives. This system breathes life into these otherwise simple characters in a mechanical way, and it's decisions like these which showcase the effectiveness of Deadly Dozen's format. Of course, the system is completely invalidated by the quick save system, but I chose to never use it and had a much more engaging experience as a result. The only reason I quick save is because I was scared of it crashing. Being a budget game, Deadly Dozen is bare bones in many ways. It's very much a function over form situation. Simple things like weapon switching animations and reload animations aren't in the game. You occasionally will get caught on geometry, and don't expect much of an attempt to tell a story or build any character arcs. The game opens and closes with real World War II footage with a voiceover, and each mission has a briefing screen with a readout of the mission overview, but outside of the instruction manual, that's really it. The developers did what they could with what they had, and it's fascinating to see how they maximized their limited resources. No strong attempt to characterize these soldiers didn't really stop me from caring about them, if only for their individual usefulness. For the first half a dozen or so missions, I used the same ragtag squad of guys. Frank Alvacino, the sniper and general all-around fantastic soldier, Boris the medic, Ramirez, my heavy weapons bazooka guy and secondary sniper, and Andrew Bollinger, my jack-of-all-trades master of none. I learnt who was good for what, and in-game I could quickly switch between them for specific tasks, such as healing or blowing something up. Everyone, except maybe Bollinger, has a specific use, and this let me care about them enough to really want to keep them alive. I reached the D-Day level with my squad and everything fell apart. It started like any other mission as we went along from objective to objective, but before not long enemies were surrounding us and appearing from the worst angles. One by one my squad was getting picked off. Each time I'd have to salvage their best items and keep moving, until I was left with my last man, none other than Andrew Bollinger, jack of all trades. In a hope to finish the objectives and scurry to the finish, I had to keep switching and picking up new weapons in a hurry because I kept running out of ammo. I was really missing being able to snipe or heal properly, and I specifically remember feeling my heart beating through my chest. It was incredibly intense being left alone for the first time, and it really showcased the usefulness of teamwork. In hindsight, I'm so impressed that this unpolished budget title elicited such a feeling from me, and the best part is that it was all dynamic and unscripted. It was very much enhanced by the difficulty and atmosphere of the game, but more on that later. So, on a lighter note, how does Deadly Dozen play? Well, as far as it controls, it's like your standard shooter from the time. Along with basic mouse look, reload, and movement controls, you can crouch, sprint, and command your squad with orders like follow, hold, and fire at will. There's no jump, but I rarely felt the need to jump anyway. You can also assign keys to individual squad formations, which turns out to be useless for reasons I'll explain later. Ranging from riflery to rocket launchers to mounted machine guns to submachine guns, there's an assortment of allied and Axis weaponry at your disposal, as well as auxiliary tools like mines, explosives, binoculars, and health packs, which you use together to complete your mission objectives and take out the enemies. Each mission starts with a briefing, a character select, a loadout select, and once the mission begins, you're left to tackle the objectives how you see fit. The core gun combat acts as the single most polarizing part of Deadly Dozen. It is brutal and generally quite unfair, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. These Nazis aren't clever in the slightest, but my god are they skilled. They're incredibly accurate with their hit scan weapons, and they more often than not spot you before you spot them. You die very quickly, and as you can see, the draw distance is very short, so a lot of the gunplay involves scanning the horizon for enemies, as well as checking which direction your teammates are firing in to find the enemies. There are two different difficulty options: difficulty, which dictates how the enemy AI react, and damage realism, which dictates how much damage each shot does to both you and your enemies. I found that hard difficulty and arcade damage was the most fun, but no matter what you can do, you can't make Deadly Dozen easy. Setting the damage to realistic is borderline suicide, because that way you can just die in one hit, and considering that just like Han, the Nazis usually shoot first, it's usually an exercise in frustration. A throwable coin intended as a distraction can be added to your inventory before each mission, which implies that stealth is a viable option, but it really isn't. As we all know, Nazis are renowned for their inhuman borderline X-ray vision, and these guys are really no exception. Any attempt at having a stealthy squad basically won't work, which is why the formations are so pointless. Combat is almost always at a distance, which refreshingly makes the rifles much more effective than the submachine guns, but you'll never find yourself crawling up behind someone to take them out, and it doesn't help that the teammates' pathfinding is dreadful. The developers seem to realize how often your teammates get stuck, and made it so if they get stuck too far behind when they should be following you, they'll just teleport back to you. At least they do that, I guess. I had a theory that sending a solo man with good sneaking skill into a mission would prove to be much more effective than trying to sneak 4 men around. And impressively, I was right. I snuck in and took out a couple of guys from behind, but I inevitably got found out, and with no squad to back me up, I didn't really have any hope of survival. With such a huge reliance on having a squad, being stealthy isn't really worth trying unless you're the last man left, but like we saw earlier, the reliance on the squad very much benefits the game because of its emergent scenarios. Speaking of that coin, there are a lot of pointless options you can add to your inventory before a mission. Why waste a slot on binoculars when you can use a rifle scope? And when would plantable explosives or anti-tank mines be more useful than a bazooka? Health packs are crucial to success, so your item slots will mostly be filled to the brim with them over anything else. It's also stupid that the coin takes up the same amount of space as a bazooka, but it's not hard to forgive. Aside from your foot soldier Nazi, Deadly Dozen's other enemy types are the shepherds and the military tanks. The dogs aren't too difficult as they simply run towards you when they see you, but they are a welcome splash of variety. Initially, the mere presence of the tanks was super threatening. Enemies are hard enough to take out on their own, so how do you expect me to take on a tank? Before not long, you realize that tanks are big, stupid, slow old things that are actually less threatening than individual men. They're super easy to take out provided you strafe a lot and have the right tools for the job, and they're really a missed opportunity that could have served as a mini-boss of sorts. So, if you're a complete weirdo like me and you're somehow not turned off by how much Deadly Dozen's gunplay hates you, then you're in for a treat. Earlier I mentioned that the unfairness isn't really a bad thing, and that's because it's just so exciting and unpredictable. It's frustratingly hard, but because your entire squad could be wiped out at any second by only a couple of enemies, every moment is more exciting than the last as you close in on finishing each level. This is only complemented by the great level design. Before I talk about that, there's one other major gameplay pillar other than first-person shooting that I haven't mentioned, and that is driving. The driving opposes the shooting in a beautiful way. Where the shootouts are slow, the vehicles are fast. Where walking is deliberate and calculated, the driving is risky and spontaneous. This juxtaposition works so well in Deadly Dozen, and it goes a long way in breaking up repetition. The vehicles are used sparingly, and hopping in one always feels like a form of stress relief. They're fun to drive, there's a good variety of trucks, cars and bikes, they control well, and overall, they're great. How they're placed in levels is what I'm most impressed by. They're often placed at your furthest objective or near the exit, providing you with an exciting opportunity to race to the finish. If the objectives are spread apart widely, there'll usually be a vehicle or two handy to transport around. One of my favorite things they did with the vehicle placement was in the second level. It's somewhat of a grueling level set in a graveyard, and probably my least favorite of the 10, but what it did at the end was outstanding to me. I left the graveyard after many hard shootouts and found a long, probably dangerous road to the exit with only a bike and sidecar at the ready. I had all 4 men still alive, and obviously I could only fit 2 on the bike. This left me with an interesting decision. Do I risk taking the bike, leaving 2 men behind, returning for them one by one? If so, what if the bike gets destroyed on the way? Maybe I should forget the bike and just walk it. There's always strength in numbers. After thinking about it, I decided to take the bike because vehicles are just too much fun to pass up. I ditched these 2 blokes in the hope that I can come back for them later. Sure enough, the long road is as dangerous as it could be, with Nazis coming at me from both sides, along with a tank waiting to greet me in the middle of it. On the brink of death with the bike down to 4 HP, it crawls past a humble 4-man Kubelwagen. This was a lifesaver, and without it I would have almost definitely failed the mission. I hopped in, sped back past the tank to my comrades and finished the mission. This was the moment that made me want to review Deadly Dozen, and it's moments like these which make the whole game worth it. The level design is generally quite good, featuring a non-linear GoldenEye-esque checklist of objectives and open multi-pathed environments. Objectives are as simple as killing officers, destroying communications equipment, or blowing up weaponry, and I like how it doesn't always explicitly explain what to do or where to go, leaving you up to your own devices. It's a simple format which works in cohesion with both the mechanics and the rest of Deadly Dozen systems. What's really the standout with the levels is the variety and atmosphere. Whether you're fighting through a snowy coastal village, freeing prisoners from an airport, killing a general at his fancy manor, ambushing Nazi-occupied Egyptian ruins, or scavenging through buildings in a ravaged city, Deadly Dozen has a surprising amount of level variety, especially for a budget title. I know that I'm easily impressed, but they all look quite good and follow their own consistent visual themes, which is complemented by the sound design. The sound design very much makes up for its underwhelming sound quality. The music is the standout here, featuring an orchestral score which ramps up and slows down at all the right times. Like most war games, and like most wars, combat is intensified by the sound of yelling and gunshots, but it's when Deadly Dozen slows down that I think is the most interesting. Noises like footsteps, rainfall, chirping crickets, and birds, coupled with a slow, haunting orchestral backing track, keep you on the edge of your seat. Now before I wrap up this review, I want to curb your expectations. I do love this game, but keep in mind how many hurdles it takes to really enjoy it. Outside of the game, installing and running this thing on Windows 10 at a resolution higher than 640 by 480 was somewhat of a trial and error nightmare. I needed to install an external program just to get it going. And once you're in, be prepared to experience a whole lot of jank. Having teammates fail to make it through a door or getting caught climbing upstairs is just annoying. Once you've gotten over that, you need to decide whether you can handle all the fog and bullshit hit scan enemies. I know I kind of enjoy the intensity of them, but most really wouldn't, and the shootouts make up for the bulk of the game. Then to really get the most out of it, you need to have the self-control to not use the quick save system. You can't really prepare yourself for these sort of things, but if you do give it a try, at least try to look past all this stuff and see some of the underlying sweetness. Deadly Dozen is a game that is miles greater than the sum of its parts. Its many systems and mechanics like the squad system, the vehicles, the mission layout, and the permadeath system really come together to create a cohesive and emergent experience. It's not a great game, but provided you can look past some potentially fatal flaws, Deadly Dozen proves itself to be a captivating game. I recommend Deadly Dozen to anyone willing and interested, but try it at your own risk.